If horror movies were therapy sessions, what would their monsters reveal? Today, I'm opening the doors to a different kind of clinic, one that exists somewhere between psychology and the paranormal, where case notes are written in candlelight and every haunting has a human story beneath it. Because sometimes what we call evil is just unhealed trauma with fangs. Welcome to Diagnosing in the Dark. I'm Brett, your haunted therapist, and these are my case files on the things that go bump inside. So, being that it's Halloween season, I wanted to do a mini series of sorts about horror movie characters, what I would diagnose them with, and what treatment interventions I would use. So, I think I'm going to do like a two-part series. I might even end up doing like a group therapy part. I don't know. Stay tuned. Case one, Michael Myers. We have dissociation and emotional numbing. So Michael doesn't speak. He doesn't emote. He doesn't even blink behind that mask. He is the definition of emotional absence, the embodiment of numbness. But what if the mask isn't hiding evil? What if it's protecting that last fragile piece of humanity he has? When a person experiences chronic trauma in early life, so complex PTSD, especially violence or emotional neglect, the mind sometimes does something extraordinary. It disconnects, it numbs, it builds walls so tall that even the self can't climb them. Michael Myers represents that total disconnection, the boy who felt too much until he learned to feel nothing at all. If he walked into my office, and let's be honest, that's a terrifying visual, the work wouldn't be about confrontation or guilt. It would be about helping him safely reconnect to his body and emotions. So we might start with grounding, simple sensory awareness, noting the temperature of the room, the feel of the chair beneath him, the sound of his own breath. For someone like Michael, even that would be an enormous step towards aliveness. From there, parts work. Internal family systems asks us to maybe explore the mask as a protector part in and of itself. The one who silences, the one who shields, who kills so that he never has to be hurt again. Behind that mask could be a terrified child who's been frozen in time. And through EMDR, we could begin to process the traumatic memories that split his psyche in two. Michael Myers may not be redeemable in a cinematic sense, but psychologically, he is a story of a person who dissociated so hard that he disappeared. Sometimes the scariest thing for the emotionally numb isn't killing, it's connection. Case two, Carrie White. We have complex PTSD and suppressed rage. So Carrie White, the shy, trembling girl with telekinetic powers and trauma coursing through her veins like static. Carrie grew up under religious abuse. She was shamed for her body, silenced for her emotions, mocked by peers, and terrorized by her mother's voice, a voice that lived in her head even when mom wasn't there, which I know so many of you can relate to. So what does she do? She swallows every emotion, every humiliation, every sting of shame until her body says, enough. And then it all explodes, literally. Her telekinesis is metaphorical. It's the body keeping the score. Fantastic penultimate book, by the way, on trauma. Highly suggest you pick it up, work with your therapist, do some journaling on your own. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. So in real life, we see this with survivors who finally hit their emotional breaking point. rage that seems to come out of nowhere, panic attacks that feel like possession. So if Carrie came to therapy, we would start by helping her feel safe in her own body, probably for the first time ever. Somatic experiencing would teach her how to sense her psychological or physiological cues before the eruption. We would reparent her inner child, giving her a nurturing voice to replace the punishing one that she inherited. We'd map her anger, not to suppress it, but to understand it, because anger is communication. It tells us where and when our boundaries were crossed. And we give her community, safe peer attachment through group therapy, because the antidote to shame is connection. We might not want to do group therapy with Michael, but again, I'm thinking that would be an interesting podcast at the very least with all the characters that are coming up today and next week. Group therapy with the highly disturbed. Carrie's power isn't the problem. Carrie's power isn't the problem. It's what happens when the world tells you it's wrong to have any power, to have any personal power, to have any sense of self. Case 3, the Babadook. Babadook, Dook, Dook. If you've seen it, you know. We have prolonged grief and depression. So the Babadook isn't really a monster. It's grief in physical form. The more the mother resists, the stronger it gets. The more she denies it, the louder it knocks. And that's exactly how grief works. Avoidance feeds the monster. This film is a master class in the psychology of mourning. The mother's depression and irritability, her disconnection from her child, her sense of haunting, they're all symptoms of unresolved grief and guilt. If she came to therapy, I'd normalize that haunting as a part of loss. When someone dies, the boundary between the living and the dead often feels thin. We smell them, we hear their voice, we feel their presence. That's the brain's way of trying to integrate the unbearable. We'd use ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, to make space for that grief without judgment. Exposure therapy to gradually revisit the memories she's avoided. Ritual journaling, so writing letters to her late husband and then reading and releasing them through fire or water in therapy. Narrative therapy to reframe the Babadook not as an enemy, but as a part of her emotional ecosystem. Because the goal isn't to banish grief, it's to integrate it. You can't get rid of the Babadook, but you can learn to live with him. What we resist persists, right? Like that's true in substance abuse, and that's true with grief. Case 4, Norman Bates. We have dissociation and enmeshment. So Norman is both mother and son. He speaks in her voice. He wears her clothes. He kills in her name. This is the tragedy of an identity that never developed on its own. His mother was controlling, abusive, emotionally invasive. Norman's psyche fractured as a survival mechanism. Part of him obeying, part of him hiding, part of him watching. When she died, he literally absorbed her, literally internalized her voice as a separate entity. If Norman sat across from me, the work would begin with acknowledging the system inside of him. So we'd use internal family systems or ego state therapy to map out his parts. So the frightened child, the obedient caretaker, and the mother part that took over to protect him from unbearable guilt. Boundaries would be a major focus. Norman never learned where he ended and others began. So, reclaiming that sense of autonomy is the only way to dissolve the enmeshment. Imagery rescripting could allow him to say goodbye, to give the internalized mother a peaceful resting place instead of letting her haunt his mind forever. Norman's story isn't just about horror, it's enmeshment turned possession. Sometimes the ghosts that control us are not supernatural, they're psychological. And sometimes exorcism means telling the dead in our heads, you don't get to drive anymore. Case 5, Pennywise. We have everyone's social media favorite, narcissism, and the psychology of fear. So Pennywise is the ultimate narcissist. He feeds on fear the way narcissists feed on admiration and control. He shapeshifts to become whatever will get the biggest reaction: a clown, a nightmare, a memory. He thrives on your attention, even if it's terror. This mirrors narcissistic personality dynamics almost perfectly. Underneath that grandiosity is a core wound of shame and defectiveness. Fear and domination becomes defenses against vulnerability. If Pennywise landed in therapy, which he wouldn't, because typically people with narcissistic personality disorder or any kind of psychopathy or sociopathy for that matter, typically only present for counseling, typically, uh, through mandation, like if they're mandated. So if he did, though, we'd use schema therapy to explore those core wounds. So, where did the shame begin? When did fear become his only form of intimacy? Empathy training would be difficult, but we could use guided imagery to awaken what little capacity may still exist. And behavioral contracts could help set external boundaries since internal ones don't exist. That can be super helpful for people with narcissistic or antisocial personality disorder. So, you know, psychopathy, sociopaths, and psychopaths. So they can learn. So if the behavioral contract is strong enough, if their buy-in is strong enough and important to them to do it, maybe they want to stay out of the prison system or who knows what might motivate them. They can learn empathy. They can learn what it looks like, right? That's where you have somebody, which sounds creepy, but who mostly for their whole life has been observing how to, which I talk a lot about in this podcast. How to, it can be a very effective tool. And for this personality disorder, it can be an effective tool if they can adhere to it. How to act as if you have empathy. And the clown isn't really laughing. He's hiding, right? Because nothing terrifies a narcissist more than being unmasked. Case 6, bring her back. So we have obsessive grief and magical thinking. I hope you guys have seen this one. It's a fantastic film. Highly recommend it. And this story is pure tragedy. It's a person so consumed by grief that they start performing rituals to undo death itself. It's what happens when grief bypasses acceptance and turns into obsession. So she's not just mourning, she's bargaining. She's trying to rewrite fate to resurrect what's gone because the alternative feels unbearable. And psychologically, that's prolonged grief with obsessive, compulsive, and psychotic features. But spiritually, it's the illusion of control. The idea that if we suffer enough or love hard enough, we can bring them back. In therapy, I'd approach this with compassion and curiosity, as I always do. I'd use internal family systems to meet the part of her that can't let go, so the rescuer, the manager, and ask what it fears will happen if it stops trying. Usually, that part believes that letting go means forgetting, which it absolutely doesn't have to. As a matter of fact, letting go of guilt, or the acceptance of grief too, so folding that in, allows you more access to the positive memories of that person rather than being trapped in the prison of your own kind of making. But also another part for people is that they feel that they can't handle it. They feel that part feels that they can't handle those difficult emotions. And for her, we'd also create new rituals. So we lean into her strengths, if you will, of being ritualistic. However, we'd redirect. So, not rituals of resurrection, but rituals of remembrance, for example. So, lighting a candle to honor rather than to summon, writing letters to integrate rather than conjure. We'd differentiate spiritual experiences from psychosis, right? Like that's what this whole podcast is about. Well, maybe not about it. It's about the intersection of the two. But as I've stated before, it's super important as a clinician to initially set up that difference in my kind of vision of the person, but also helping them see the difference between psychosis and a spiritual experience, and helping her stay grounded while still acknowledging that this love is real and this longing is real. And through EMDR, we'd reprocess that terrible moment of loss, the trauma that froze her in time, because sometimes bringing her back isn't about the dead at all. It's about resurrecting the part of ourselves that died with them. Case 7, the witch. We have religious trauma and we have feminine liberation. So, the witch, or as the film calls her, the vitch, is about liberation disguised as damnation. So, banished from her family, shamed by religion, accused of sin, she finds power where she was told only evil existed. Her so called possession is actually reclamation. It's her reclaiming herself, her power. And this is religious trauma syndrome in cinematic form. It's what happens when you're taught that your body is sinful, your voice is rebellion, and your independence is heresy. And one day, you stop apologizing for existing. If she came to therapy, we'd deconstruct those belief systems. We'd talk about spiritual abuse, how it conditions you to fear your own intuition. Very confusing for people. We'd work on empowerment through shadow work. So, integrating the parts of her she was forced to exile. So, sexuality, rage, instinct, and most of all, self trust. And we'd use somatic release, so physical release, somatic release, to reclaim her body through breath, movement, ritual, or dance. Dance is the best. Because sometimes healing means dancing with the darkness and realizing it's just your power waiting to be named. Every monster has a motive, every haunting has a history. And if we listen closely enough, even the darkest creatures can tell us, show us, teach us how to heal. Because in therapy, as in horror, what we avoid will always come back. Always, always, always. What you persist or what you resist persists. So our task isn't to destroy the darkness or to fear it. It's to understand it, embrace it, to turn towards the mask, towards the ghost, the witch, the grief, and ask, what are you trying to show me? When we stop running the haunting ends. And what remains is just us, human, messy, alive, and worthy of light. I'm Brett, your haunted therapist, and these were tonight's case notes. Tonight's spooky grand rounds, if you will. Until next time, haunted hearts, keep your shadows close and your candles lit.